There we go. Recording. All right. So yeah, let's go ahead and look at right from the beginning here. So First King starts, and David is seriously old, right?
Yep.
And so you get a picture of his feebleness right off the bat. He couldn't get warm, so they found a young woman to lay down next to him to keep him warm. They don't have furnaces and things like that like we've got now, or electric blankets, or microwaves with rice bags.
You think they would have like maybe a fireplace,
Well, even when they had fires, ancient times they had fires, but you had to keep down the smoke because they didn't have chimneys. They just filled up with smoke. So you got an unhealthy person that's cold, and you start a fire and fill his lungs up with smoke. And it just wasn't that way until, I don't know when chimneys were actually invented, and even when chimneys were invented, they put it on an outside wall, which is understandable. Still, a lot of houses, you don't have the chimney on the outside wall, and instead of through the middle. And then they didn't have dampers, so all of the heat that is in the house just goes right up the chimney. And that we're talking about a palace. Heating a palace is a little different than heating a small hovel, and so there's a number of factors here. But I remember when Mindy was homeschooling the girls, it was a fictional book about the life of a family in China. And it was a really interesting book because this guy buys his wife from a local wealthy person. Eventually he rises to wealth and replaces the man that owned this huge walled courtyard and houses and everything else. But in there, when when he had a child, his father he had one child, but then when that child started to grow and they had a second one, his father was really happy because that child could sleep with him in his bedroom, in his bed, and keep him warm. And so I think that's common for older people through most history, is they would sleep with somebody else to keep them warm when they're older. So it was a fiction book, but it was about a lot of real historic events and what a life in China was really like before the revolution. So that was what was common. We got two people in the waiting room. Admit Tom. Here we go. Here we go. Tom's here now. Greg is still waiting to connect to his audio.
I'm here.
Yeah, I can hear you, Tom. I'm waiting on Greg to see when he's there. Now Greg's with us. Hello, Greg. So we are in chapter 1 of Kings. We just talked just briefly about the feebleness of David, and it's really pointing out his impotence. Now here's a great warrior, has a harem, great king, everything, and now he can't even keep warm, and he doesn't even able. It's almost pointing out he's almost not able to do anything with women anymore. So this young woman, Abishag the Shunammite, has no sexual intimacy with him. It's just to keep him warm. Then and that girl's going to be important as you go on a little bit. If you've read through these chapters, you'll see that she comes up again, and we'll get into that. So when he is feeble, it's setting up the controversy, because now there's a reason why he could die and not set up a king, which his oldest living son, Adoniah, would have probably been better off if he waited. But I think he already knew. Well, what do you think the clues would be that he already knew that he wasn't going to really be king if he waited? So look down at verse 10 or verse 9. Adoniah sacrifice sheep and oxen and fattened calf by the serpent stone, which really is probably looking at sliding stone. There's a hill where a lot of stones have slid down a steep slope there. And it looks like it was probably trying to translate what that means. It could actually be sliding and instead of serpents, witches, Behide and Rogel, and invited all his brothers, the king's sons, the royal officials of Judah, but he did not invite Nathan the prophet or Benaiah or the mighty men or Solomon his brother. Why not invite Solomon if he invited all his other brothers?
If Solomon was going to get it, I would.
That's right.
Right.
So
I'm not going to fight the guy that.
Right. Now you also look, why do you think, if you look at this passage here, what has he done to try and prepare himself to make himself king?
He sacrifices the animals.
Yeah, but look up before that. So look at verse 5. He exalts himself. He says, I'll be king. He prepared for himself chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. And his father had never at any time displeased him by asking, why have you done this? And so, thus and so. You see that? So he's done these things, testing the water, and his impotent father's not doing anything. So now he has confidence to not wait for Solomon. He can I might as well just go ahead because my father's not stopping me. And it says the 3 reasons why he thinks he can do this is he was very handsome, right? That plays out many times. His other older brother that revolted against David was the same thing. He was super attractive. And when David was anointed king, it was David's older brother they thought was, attractive and should be king. So they're still picking kings based on their looks. Anyway, and then he was born the next after Absalom. So Absalom was the oldest, and then he was killed when he rose up against David. So he's the next in line. So he's oldest, he's good looking. Let me see what other, and David didn't actually do anything to stop him from exalting himself. So he went ahead and set up a sacrificial dinner, and he invited some allies. Who did he invite?
Royal officials of Judah.
Right.
And Nathan the prophet and Ben.
No, Nathan wasn't invited.
Oh, he did not invite. Okay,
Yeah.
I got that wrong. Okay.
He conferred with Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Abiathar the priest. Okay, the Abiathar the priest is one of the 2. There seems to be like 2 high priests and 2 main locations where they're actually doing certain sacrifices. One of them is at David's home. I mean, in David, where he put a tent in Jerusalem where the ark is, and all of the tabernacle vestiges would be in another place. And so it looked like there could have been 2 different people actually meeting, 2 different high priests at the time, or 2 priests functioning as sacrificial priests. And so one of them is Abiathar, the other one is Zadok. Okay, now Joab, why would he want Joab with him?
To lead the armies.
Right, he's the commander of the armies. And so, what do we know about Joab?
Oh, who did he kill? He killed
You don't need to name them, but you remember the stories. It's actually 3 people he killed that David wanted to kill.
Yep.
One was Abner, who was commander of the armies of the northern tribes when just at the time David was becoming king of all the northern and the southern tribes, right? And Abner was following David, and he was a general, and he was running, and Joab's brother was following him, and he kept telling him to back off, and he wouldn't. And so he put the butt of his spear and killed his brother. So he made peace with David, but Joab wanted to kill him because he killed his brother. That's one. Amasa was put in charge of the army, and Joab got jealous, and he killed him, pulled him by the beard, stabbed him with a knife. And then the third one, who's the third person he killed?
Oh, wasn't it? It was the other brother, wasn't it?
Yep, you got it.
that.
Yep. He killed Absalom, his brother that, he wasn't, well, no, Adonijah's brother. He killed him when he rebelled against David. It's really the two other commanding officers that he killed, though, that is going to make David pretty upset. But he doesn't it's like an obvious one for him to try and get. He's a really good commander. He's got the troops that follow him, and he doesn't necessarily agree with David all the time. He's done things in opposition to David before, not like seditious, but not, and certainly in this plan, he isn't going along with the plan that obviously they know Solomon is the one that's favored, but he's, hitching his wagon to Adoniah. So anyway, so there's a sacrifice that's going on. Let me see if I got anything else going on here. And then verse 12, I think it's interesting that you have now when Nathan comes to Bathsheba and says, in this verse 11, have you not heard that Adoniah, the son of Haggith, has become king in David? Our Lord does not know it. Therefore, come, let me give you advice that you may save your own life and the life of your son Solomon. So throughout many times when there's changes in power, even in the book of Judges, there's been times where the brothers are just put to death because one brother wants to rule. So what was his name? Jacqueline, you might be able to help me with that. Gideon, when he died, he had like 70 sons, all killed by one son that had his mother was a concubine. So it was put to death. And so he has a legitimate concern here that if Adoniah becomes king, he's going to kill Solomon and his mother probably after David dies. So any thoughts, questions on that? Fairly straightforward. Transitions of power throughout world history do not usually go smoothly, right? So we're going to see that here. Then chapter 2, well, I didn't see anything really that important other than the plan to anoint Solomon. So Solomon's anointed king, turns the tide. Zadok becomes the priest, and Benaiah, the son of Jodah, becomes the ruler of his armies. It's interesting that Zadok becomes a high priest, and the other high priest, let me see if I can find this. This will be, we'll wait till we get down to verse 35. But he ended up giving his son a charge to his son in chapter 2. When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I am about to go the way of the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man, and keep charge of the Lord your God, walking in his ways and keeping it.
Uh-oh.
His statutes and his commands and his rules. And your sons pay close attention to their way and walking before me. And David is handing on to his son that God has promised that we will always have a descendant on the throne, but you have to do what? Follow the commandments. It's the same charge that God gave all of Israel. Follow my commandments. If you do this, you will live prosperously in the land. I will take care of you. I'll put your enemies down on every side. They just don't, right? So we see it over and over and over. They don't. And let me see here. I like this though. What he says is show yourself a man, and just I don't have any sons, you know, but I think there should.
Freezing up?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought it was my computer. I'm like, okay, I'm not seeing anybody moving. Sometimes he probably doesn't know.
You guys able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you,
Yeah.
Jacqueline.
Okay, yeah, because I didn't want to interrupt and have my thing go like it has it. So
Be a time where a father has a talk with his son.
He doesn't know he's freezing up.
Yeah, now he's gone.
Oh,
I-
he is gone.
I text
oh, it says
Wait.
I'm the host.
Well, Jacqueline, you're going to have to fill in. Or Rod, your turn.
not me. You're kind of hard to hear too.
I'm hard to hear?
No, Jacqueline is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought so. Where internet is not as good now.
Yeah, it says your network
So-
bandwidth is low.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change sometime this month.
I'm surprised he's not back on.
Yeah.
So what'd y'all do for Halloween? Did you dress up?
No,
Rod, come on.
no,
Oh. Did you hand out candy?
no,
Yeah.
No?
no. Where I live, I wouldn't.
I've refused to celebrate Halloween since I was a kid.
You refused?
Yeah, even as a small child. Like
Wow.
in my preschool, my mom dropped me off at preschool and I got upset and refused to participate.
Oh, gosh, I love Halloween. I didn't do anything for Halloween.
Yeah.
I watched Netflix.
We've been moving, so everything's been kind of chaotic here.
That sounds like fun.
So I check out my dinner.
You what? Let me call him.
I text him. He said that he'll be back in a sec, was what he said.
Oh, okay.
Well, he must be working on it.
Yeah.
So
Probably have to get one of those teenager girls to help him.
well, I wonder, because sometimes he's on his internet, sometimes he's on his phone, and you know how sometimes he says one works better than the other.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Because I think I missed most of what he was saying, and I thought it was me. And I'm like, I have no idea.
Yeah, and that's sometimes it's hard to tell if it's on our end or on his end, and that's what I end up doing, looking around and see if like out of the other two pictures, you were still moving, so that led me to believe that it was him and not me.
Yeah, that's what I have to do too. Because I'm like, okay, I know Rick's frozen, and I'm like, okay, Rod, you're gonna have to like move your head or something.
Yeah.
We know that you're moving around. Oh. So did Biden get Michigan? Did they call it yet?
I have absolutely no idea. not watched any news or heard any news the entire day. So I guess I'm not for sure if that makes me a bad American or
Can you
not.
guys see me now?
Yep.
You can?
Yep.
There you
Oh,
are.
good.
Yep.
All right. I do not know what happened. I'm not real happy with my internet these days. So sometimes I don't know if it's my computer or if it's the internet. My computer's like 8 or 9 years old. So
Yeah, we didn't catch really anything of what you said. That
I don't know where I stopped. I don't know where I just heard Joanne say, "Is Rick frozen?" I'm like, "No, I can see me just fine."
it was when you talked about not having sons in the.
Oh, I didn't say much after that. I just thought, what would it be like? What would your last words be if you had, to your children, if you knew you were dying? I don't have sons, so I wouldn't say to my girls, be a man, but what would you say?
To my son?
Or daughter, really?
I would say, I would tell him, like, make sure Jesus is close to your heart and God is the center of your life.
That's pretty much what David's saying, other than some things he's saying about rule the kingdom and a couple of last minute things he says to him. But that's essentially what's going on here. He's going to die. I want you to know some things before you die. I remember James Dobson. This is going back into the 80s after I became a Christian. Pistol Pete Maravich. Do you know who he is, Rod?
I remember hearing of him, but I don't know.
He's that still the highest scorer in all of NBA history. No, college history, NC2A division basketball history, and he was ahead of his time as a basketball player. He was the first professional basketball player to sign $1 million contract, and he had become a Christian after he retired. And then he went out to focus on the family to go on an interview on the radio, and they went and played basketball. This one, the ministry was still in California. And they finished a game, and he says, "How you doing?" He goes, "Man, it's been a long since I played. This is fun." And James Dobson turned around, and then he heard a thud. He turned around, he collapsed and died. And so this became big news. And, James Dobson still had a kid at home that was like in high school. And so he came home and he said, I could die like that and you would find out about it on the news, because of who I am. And I don't know when I'm going to go and if I'm going to get to say some things to you. So I'm going to say them to you right now. And so what he said was, I want you to make the most out of your life. I care what you do professionally and what you do with your whole life. I care about, your dreams, your aspirations, and what you want in life. But there's only one thing I really could compare about is that when I go, I'm going to be waiting there for you. So make sure you be there. You follow me there. I will search the world. I will search all of the place looking for you. I'm waiting for you. I'm like, wow, that was so powerful. And so, at some point, I just need to be able to say that to each one of my kids, before I die. What I would want to say is, hey, make sure you're there. There's nothing more important. There's things that are important, but there's nothing more important than that. So that's just what I thought about when I read that passage where he died. By the way, if I freeze up, I will see you. So, just start waving, and I will know, and then I will try and reconnect or something. So I don't know what's going on. So anyway, but that's what I got kind of out of that personally as a personal application when David's handing off the torch, to his son to take over. Then he says some really interesting things here. Verses 5 and
it's a little different because it's like now when you add this part to the daughters of like who you have
okay. Now we got the important stuff done. I want to tell you who to kill. So he says, moreover, you also know that Joab, the son of Zeruiah, did what he did to me, how he dealt with the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner, the son of Ner, and Amasa, the son of Jether, who he killed, avenging in time of peace for your brother that had been, for blood that had been shed in war, and putting the blood of war on the belt around his waist and the sandals of his feet. Therefore, according to your wisdom, act therefore according to your wisdom, but do not let his gray head go down to Sheol in peace. Okay, and then he says who he's going to be loyal to, but he says put this guy to death. Now, Solomon also has a reason to put this guy to death too, right? What would that be?
Oh,
Right at the beginning of the chapter, his brother decided to be king. Who'd he take with him?
right. Yep.
Yeah, see, he's already an opponent, and when you're in a switch of power, you don't want a commander of the military against you.
Right.
So for a political move, this is like, especially in those times, it's not like, man, you challenge me, I'm going to take you to the Supreme Court. It's not happening. There is no Supreme Court. It's like they're going to plan to take over, then Solomon will be dead. So, but he has reasons besides that. But why would David have his son? Why would David want to make sure his son did this?
Again, maybe it's just part of he's trying to get him to get everything in order so he can be successful with following God.
Well, he says, it's because of the two men he put to death, in peace. They were trying to avenge blood that was done in war. But at peacetime, he put these two people to death. But so what he did, he's guilty of something here. Now, what happened at the end of 2 Samuel? Do you remember? There's two events that cause a famine and a plague. What caused the famine? It's a really interesting story. Remember, there's 3 years and David prays. So why is there a famine, Lord? It's because.
Well, there was because he did the census was one of them, but
Yeah, that was David's sin.
that wasn't it. It was yeah. I don't know without having to scroll back and read.
Yeah, it is Saul that did something. King Saul tried to wipe out the Jebusites, which there was a peace treaty between Israel and the Jebusites, remember? And so God said, this is unjust. Therefore, you got to do something about it. The Jebusites said, we can't put people to death. We're not even citizens. So David took the 7 descendants of Saul and they were put to death to put an end to the curse in the land. So David is handing off the country to his son with a commander that's got blood on his hands. And he's thinking, I don't really want to give you the kingdom where you might be due for a 3-year plague or a 3-year famine. This needs to be taken care of, right? That's the way they would have thought. I don't know that has to be the reason, but it makes perfect sense. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, dropping down. So let me see here. So David dies. Oh, wait, now we go here. Deal loyally. Then Shimei, the son of Gera. He is the one who was throwing rocks at him when he was fleeing Absalom. And David promised not to kill him, but he doesn't think he deserves to just live out his life after he opposed him as king. And if he is opposing David, you've got this enemy here that could also oppose you. And while I'm stronger because I've developed, this nation, all this loyalty, you're new, maybe he's going to try and wrestle up trouble against you. So that man is put to death as well. All right. So he asks him to be put to death. And then David dies, sleeps with his fathers. And then you have verse 13. This is really interesting, right? So verse 13, Adoniah, his brother that tried to be king, goes to Bathsheba, his mother, and asks if he can have the Shumanite girl that was sleeping with David to keep him warm as a wife, right? To make his. And so she goes to ask Solomon, and Solomon says, what? You want to give him the kingdom too? What's going on here? Do you remember when I said this before, when when David got the kingdom from Saul, there is a text in that shows that David inherited, when David then committed sin with Bathsheba, David said, didn't I give you all of Saul's wives? Right? And then when his son tries to take over, he takes his concubines on the roof. He's the taking of a harem or taking the wives of a previous king sets yourself up to look like king. So Adoniah still wants to be king. So by taking one of his father's concubines, he's taking something that doesn't belong to him and setting himself up. It looks an awful lot like he still has hopes to be king. And David said, I'll let you live. You just need to make sure you keep your life in such a way that it's supportive of me and you're not going to be seditious. Well, the first sign of sedition, he doesn't even, it's like he pounces on it. I'm going to get rid of him because I'm going to take a chance of having somebody try and undermine my kingship. And so he destroys him. So, and then you drop down to verse 35. Well, you have actually where these people are put to death. So at any rate, Joab is put to death, and so that all happens. And then you go to verse 35. The king put Benaiah the son of Judah over the army in place of Joab, and the king put Zadok the priest in the place of Abiathar. Now remember, Abiathar was the other priest that supported Adonijah, right? But if you were to go all the way back to 1 Samuel chapter 2, do you remember when Samuel was a little kid and he was asleep in the temple and or in the tabernacle, and he said, he heard his name, and he ran out to the high priest Eli and said, you called me. He said, no, go back to sleep. Remember that story? Right?
Yep.
And then he says, no, go back and say, speak, Lord, for your servant's listening. And then you tell me everything the Lord says. And what the message God gave him was, your sons and you are going to die on the same day. The day you hear of your sons die, you will die. And I will make sure that in the future, none of your sons will ever be priests again. They will be begging bread. Abiathar is the last in line of Eli. He's the last priest. So he's been replaced by Zadok, and that's it. None of Eli's descendants are ever involved in the priesthood again. So the prophecy comes true in that. That's the end of it. Zadok's line is, they stay priests in the line of priesthood for generations. I believe even after the return. And Jacqueline, can you hear me? Can you speak, Jacqueline?
Yes, I can.
So do you know how long the descendants of Zadok were the high priest?
Sorry, my dad's here too, so I'm asking him if he knows.
Yeah, I know that it's like to 171 BC, but I can't remember. I think that's after the return from Babylon that the Zadok priesthood has been preserved.
Yes, it was. I think when they got to the Romans, and the King Herod's son, they started changing games who was high priest. The ruler chose who was going to be high priest, but it had to be of the high priestly family, at least for a while.
Yeah, but I think it was stayed. I think that the Zadok was the priest until the war between the Syrians and the Egyptians that, and then they eventually, the Syrians took over Israel and they put a pig or statue of with the Ptolemy in the temple and sacrificed the pig in the temple. I think that's when the Zadok priesthood ends. That's all in the book of Maccabees, which is in the Catholic Bible, not in ours. So
I know that currently that they have priests supposedly of the line of Zadok that are prepared to become high priests again, that are preparing at the Dead Sea area.
that'll be really interesting to know how they were able to keep track of that, but it would be awesome to see, because I know they've done better job keeping genealogical records than any other ancient peoples, but that's still pretty incredible. So, but they did maintain that line all the way to 171 BC. And I think that's after they had returned and rebuilt the temple. So the second temple period, I think it was still the sons of Zadok. All right, then now we got
Oh, 1 second, Rick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that 171 is when the leaders of Judea started choosing who was going to be, the Romans started choosing who was going to be high priest.
Yes, I think though, but I think something happened to the descendants of Zadok there, because they started choosing the line of that was, I can't even remember the.
It became like all other priesthoods. Whoever gave the most money to the ruler got to be high priest.
Yes, that's true.
And Onan got, or I can't remember the guy's name, but anyway, he thought he was going to be high priest, and somebody gave more money and he was put out.
Doesn't surprise me. But I can't remember the priestly family that started and led the Maccabean revolts. Do you know that family, that priestly family?
The Maccabees, right?
They weren't called the Maccabees. They're called something else. But
No.
it's the Maccabees
Yeah.
revolt. So if you were to look up.
Hishmonians?
Oh,
What?
my dad's saying Hishmonians. My dad is saying the Hishmonians.
That doesn't sound familiar. Let me see. Let me check something. Okay, let me see here. Matthias says Hasmoneans. So
Okay, yeah.
Hasmoneans. And so Matthias sparked a revolt, and his son actually became the ruler and high priest once Judah Maccabee was their last name. They started a dynasty that didn't have anything to do with the sons of Zadok. So it's at that point that I think the Zadok priesthood is no longer leading in the temple. And then you have the Romans intervene later. So, all right. Chapter 3, unless anybody has any questions about chapter 2. All right. So chapter 3, Solomon made a marriage alliance with Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. He took Pharaoh's daughter and brought her into the city of David until he finished building his own house and then the house of the Lord and a wall around Jerusalem. And he actually keeps her in a different house. It does not, this is not his first wife. I used to think it was, but as you start doing the math, which I'm not going to do right now, how old he was how long he was king, when he became king, he had at least one other wife before this one. But what do you think? Why do you think this is important? Why include this and not another wife or his first wife?
From a powerful family.
What?
I said she's from a powerful family.
Yes, her father.
Maybe.
And Egypt isn't really a real powerful nation at this time, but even then, even later on, you see kings unify with other kingdoms by what? bloodline marriages, marrying your daughter off or your son marrying the daughter of another king to expand peace treaties, better trade, everything else. You're expanding your influence. He does that. But there's a reason why this is important. And it's not just because it's Egypt or because she's an important person. Go open up, go to Deuteronomy chapter 7.
I have a guess.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because he married someone who is a foreign wife, because they were strictly told that they're to keep their wives from Israel if they're kings.
That's exactly right. And why would that be a big deal to God?
Because he warns that if you marry a foreign woman, that she's going to lead you astray to start worshiping her gods.
And did that happen to Solomon?
Oh yeah,
Yes, it did. It's,
big time.
so the writer is showing you even before he gets to tell you about how wise and amazing he is, he's telling you his downfall right at the beginning of this chapter. His downfall is going to be marrying other women and letting them lead him to worship other gods. But go to chapter 7 in Deuteronomy. What did I say? What verse was that? Deuteronomy 7:3. Somebody read that.
Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons or take their daughters for your sons.
Keep reading.
For they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and will quickly destroy you.
Yes. So we're going to see later on that this is Solomon's undoing. It starts out the chapter just laying it out for you to see this is a problem. The writers of the Old Testament really are masterful writers. They're telling a story and it's not boring. They're like giving you clues. We just don't always pick up on them. And so we just like, oh, cool, he got married. No, this is here for a reason. She's not Jewish. And he builds her as her own place because it says in Kings later, that it's because the ark of the Lord that she's not allowed to live where Solomon was living, because that happened to store the ark of the covenant for a while. So when that happened, no longer can she, a foreigner, be in the same place where the ark of the covenant actually had been. So he knew, he just did it anyway because it was expedient. It's not a bad idea to marry this daughter of another king because he ain't going to attack me when I got his daughter in my house, right? So we can set up trade, we can each prosper. It's a good deal. It's just not a good deal for him when God said, don't do this because your wives will lead you astray, or your husbands. If you give your daughter, or you give your daughters to a foreign man, you're going to lead them astray. So they're told not to do it, and that's Solomon's undoing. That's why it's set up here. But it says right here at this point, Solomon loved the Lord and walking with the statutes of David his father, and he sacrificed and made offerings in the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. Now that's another thing. See that word high place? So you might want to underline that. High place is going to be really important in the book of Kings, first and second, both Kings. Anybody want to guess why that's important? You're about ready to head into a passage where Solomon goes into a major building project. What's he going to build?
Temple.
Yeah, he's going to build a temple. So where do you do sacrifices once the temple's built?
The temple.
Right. And so he says, for that was the great high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon. But it's because the temple isn't built yet that he's sacrificing at the high place. But all the way through this book, one of the criticisms of the kings are going to be that they sacrificed on high places. I think almost every single one of them, until the last king of Judah. The last good king of Judah, I should say, Josiah. So towards the end, before they're deported and taken to Babylon, that he's the first king that destroys all the high places. but all the other kings, even the good ones, still sacrifice in high places. It's against the law in the Mosaic law. They're not supposed to. So go to Deuteronomy chapter 12. And Deuteronomy chapter 12, there's quite a few verses I'm going to read here. So Deuteronomy chapter 12, 1 through 14. These are the statutes and the rules that you shall be careful to do in the land that the Lord your God of your fathers has given you to possess all the days you live on the earth. You shall surely destroy all the places where the nations whom you dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains and on the hills and under every hilly green tree. You shall tear down their altars, dash them to pieces, their pillars, and burn their Asherim with fire. You shall chop down their carved images and their gods and destroy the name of that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. See that? On those high places. But you shall seek the place that the Lord your God will choose out for all of your tribes to put his name and make his habitation there. There you shall go, and you shall bring your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes and your contributions that you present, your vow offerings and your freewill offerings of firstborn of your herd and your flock. And there you shall eat before me, before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your households, in all that you undertake, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. So God is going to choose a place that they can do this. It's not the high places. And what the writer of Kings is, he's always going to be condemning the high places, and he's going to show the place that the Lord chose. How did God choose a place? You guys remember, how did God actually choose a place where everybody was supposed to worship and sacrifice? It was just last week.
I wasn't here.
Oh, you cop out. You read the passages though. So David counts the nation, the census, right? And then he's given 3 choices: 3 years famine, 3 months chased by enemy, 3 days plague. He chooses what?
Plague.
3 days plague, right? The death angel flies over everybody, he's killing people, and then stops where?
At the threshing floor.
Yes. And tells David to sacrifice there. Buy it and build my temple there. So the writer of both, I think actually the writer of Samuel and the writer of 1st and 2nd Kings is the same writer. There are people that disagree, but I think it's the same one. So you see this connection that the writer of Samuel is trying to show that God chose that place, and Kings is trying to show that that's the place too, where Solomon builds it. And the high places are inappropriate places to worship. He would choose a place, and that place is going to be where Solomon builds his temple, right? So that, remember I said you see in the beginning of 3, you see he's weaving a story here. He shows you where Solomon's shortfall is going to be. He's married a foreigner, he's going to worship a foreign god, and not in the temple. All right. You also see he's showing you this issue of the temple is the place where God chooses, not the high places, but you're going to see over and over and over where kings sacrifice in the high places instead of the temple. Complete violation. And it's even after God shows them the place where he's going to be. They still, and when you read about the building of the temple, what do you see when he actually dedicates the temple?
The glory of God, the Shekinah.
Yeah, Shekinah glory. And what is it? The Shekinah glory is the cloud that settles into the temple, right? So,
Yep.
so this cloud is the same type of cloud that shows God's presence when he's leading the Hebrews out of Egypt, right? Cloud by pillar of fire by night and cloud by day. That cloud fills the temple. And then Solomon prays that this would be the place where God would reside, where everybody would come and worship. And at the end of his prayer in Chronicles, it doesn't say it in here, that fire comes down from heaven and consumes the sacrifices. The writer is trying to make you see there is no doubt about the place they're supposed to worship. They abandon this as you go through the book. It's going to be their downfall. They worship foreign gods and they don't worship God right where it's supposed to be. And when after Solomon dies, this is going to be a real big issue right away. So Solomon then, anyway, one of the things I noticed was, and Jacqueline will probably appreciate this, right? How does God actually speak to Solomon?
In his dream.
Yeah, in his dream. And I have always been skeptical of dreams. I still have a little bit of skeptic, but there's no doubt all the way through the Bible, God actually teaches and speaks to people in dreams. I kind of think God speaks to everybody but me in dreams. other people through things but dreams. But at any rate, he definitely speaks in dreams. And so it's worth paying attention to them and seeing God is that you trying to speak to me when you have a dream that just stands out. It's not unwise to do that. All right. And he only appears to Solomon twice, and both times in the same way. He just says in the same way. He doesn't actually say a dream. He just says in the same way. So I believe that he appeared to him both times in a dream. All right. Let me see here. I'm skipping around a little bit here. Chapter 3, verse 8 is an interesting thing.
Actually, 1 second. Can I address the thing on the dreams?
Absolutely not. No, go ahead.
I think one reason why God speaks to people in dreams is because a lot of times when we're awake and we're conscious, we shut down so many things and we shut down the opportunity for the Lord to speak to us. And when we're in our dream state where anything is possible, it just is we're more open to things occurring that we would normally not be open to. And so I think that's one of the reasons why God uses dreams so much, because it allows him to say things that we wouldn't be willing to hear when we're awake and conscious and in control of our own thought process.
It's interesting though, because he didn't speak to Mary that way, but he did Joseph. And it's like always different, I'd still prefer the angel that appears right in front of me than in the dream where I'm going like, that was a whacked dream. You know what I'm saying?
I don't know. I mean, it depends upon your threshold for terror.
My what?
Threshold for terror. When you have an angel or you have one of these heavenly beings encounter you, there's a lot of terror involved in that and a lot of fear. And I've heard prophets talk about having God call them up into heavenlies. I remember one prophet talking about getting called up into the heavenlies, and he said it was 20 years before he let the Lord convince him that he should go back again.
Yeah,
but
you read about, but the scriptures isn't it always that way? I mean, they're just walking up to Abraham's like, do. Guess what we're gonna do to Sodom and Gomorrah? It's not like he's terrified.
Well, that's
Gideon, same thing. Gideon's just a dude. Hey, if you're really God, can you show me? Sure, I'll start your dinner on fire here. And it just, so it's not always like that.
Yeah, you're right. There are definitely times where they come disguised. Was it it talks about in the Old Testament that you entertain angels, or New Testament you entertain angels unaware. That they're angels and heavenly beings walking around, basically disguised.
Or they could be watching us on
like
TV
Mary's
and they're saying, look what he did. Did you hear me?
Yeah, but Mary's encounter definitely had a lot of fear involved with it.
That's true. She did. He said, hey, chill. It's just me, an angel. Deal with us every single day, right? Yeah. And she does actually calm down, and listen. She's at first afraid. I'll take that. I'm ready to be terrified just so they can say, don't worry, I come in peace. Cool. It'd be great. I always think there's one scene, Jacqueline, that it always fascinates me when Peter is put into jail and an angel releases him from jail. And he goes to a small group, a house prayer
Yeah.
group, and
Yeah.
he knocks on the door, and the servant goes to the door, sees that it's Peter, slams the door, goes to said, Peter's at the front door. And they're like, nah,
No,
it's
just
just
his
this
angel.
angel.
Yeah. Yeah. Which
Like-
makes you wonder, I mean, I've had times like that before where I've had, at least not physically, but I've had people tell me that, you came to me in a dream and told me blah, 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 blah. And I used to think that's so bizarre that people constantly got dreams that I came to them. And then at one point I began to realize this may be my angel that's going to them and telling them these things in their dreams. So it was an interesting thought to me, but
It's possible. I just wonder though, it's like, think about those guys though in the New Testament. Peter's at the front door and they say, nah, it's just his angel. But if she come up and said, hey, Peter's angel's at the front door, would they have jumped up to go see? I would like, hey, let's go check out the angel at the front door. Did you invite him in? Is he hungry? I don't know. I just wouldn't have just said, it's just an angel. But that's what they did.
But think about it then, how often they must have been interacting with angels and with the angels involved with people. That was their response. Because, I mean, today's day and age, if someone came running into the congregation, at LCC and said, oh, so-and-so's here, and we're like, nah, it's just no one would say, oh, it's just an angel. 'Cause that wouldn't even be in the process of thought just because we've not encountered that sort of thing.
It could be, but then you'd have to say, okay, when Jesus was walking on water and they said it's a ghost, they didn't have a whole lot of encounters with ghosts to think it was a ghost, but it can't be Jesus, it must be a ghost. It just could be, I don't know. It's crazy. It just feels out there to me, but I don't know. I would definitely check out an angel if there was one at the front door. And if you said, hey, there's an angel at the back door of the church, I'd go to the back door, Jacqueline, in a hurry. I'd give you the mic, finish the sermon. I'm going to go check out the angel. Anyway, going on, let me see here. Oh, verse 8 of chapter 3. There's a little phrase in here that's a clue that we wouldn't think is important, but to scholars, it's very important. So, and your servant is, wait a second, chapter 3, did I say verse 8?
Mhm.
Let me see, it's about the poles. Oh, no, it can't be verse 3. This is actually going to be verse 8. Chapter 8. That's what's going on. So it's chapter 8. After he's built the temple, they moved everything in there. Chapter 8, verse 8. The poles, now these are the poles that they use to carry the ark, okay? The priests carried the ark through the poles that go on the Ark of the Covenant, and they carry it, and then they lay it in place. And the poles are so long, they stick out the curtains, right? So verse 8 says, and the poles were so long that the ends of the poles were seen from the holy place from before the inner sanctuary, but they could not be seen from the outside. And they are what?
Still there today.
Yeah, they're there to this day. So now that's a clue of when that story was written, whether this author was using a story from somewhere else or he's actually writing to the people, which is what I think he's actually doing. When this was written, we know the temple wasn't destroyed yet by the king of Babylon, by Nebuchadnezzar. So this book is written sometime before the destruction of the temple. It's just a way to date the writer. We know that this is older. This isn't written like later, because he's saying things like, and it's there to this day. They wouldn't write it if it wasn't the case. So this is written, we wouldn't think it's that big a deal because we're not that interested in it. But to scholars trying to figure out, when are these books written? Who were they written by? What would be going on that this would be important? This was written before all the Israelites are deported. And so it's probably written, it ends when Second Kings is done. This book is probably written shortly after the second book is done, because they're getting started off,
Yeah, do they think
right
that
after
this thing was
Second
written?
Kings. What?
Did they think that this was written by Gad? Because I know that there was some parts of Samuel that they said was akin to what is written in the book of Gad.
Book of Gad? I'm not familiar
Yeah,
with the Book of Gad.
It's well, it's not like a biblical book or
I was
something
going
like
to
that, but
say, I've never heard of the Book
there
of Gad. Like, I'm not that familiar with
But
the
there's-
minor prophets, but that's like a Book of Gad? I hadn't heard that. Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, no, it talks about it in Samuel, sorry. It talks about it in Samuel about how Gad wrote some things, and that it was written, that he had a book that he had written and that this was written in it too.
Well, that's interesting.
And it talks about that.
It could be. I did read something that was speculation whether Gad was the author. They have a hard time figuring out who would write it. It's somewhat speculative, but there's some reasons why some people choose Gad, and that would make sense. Gad is one of David's prophets, right? I believe, right, Jacqueline?
Yeah, he was.
Okay. So it was Nathan and Gad, I think both. I think it was Gad that told him that he had sinned, or it was I'm not sure if it was Gad was the one that told him that Saul had, because Saul had tried to wipe out the Jebusites, or whether it was or it could be him in both cases.
I know Gad was the one who did the plague.
Okay, the plague, three
The
choices.
census. Yeah.
Okay. Did he
And
do
then
the
he
one?
talked to him too about that he should go into the forest when he was first running from Saul. He
From
said,
Saul, Gad did?
yeah, he said, leave Gath and go into the forest in around Judea.
Really? I didn't know he had been with David that long.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do some research on the person of Gad. Okay, now that's something that you guys can pay attention to too. So when you see a name like Gad, you can just go down the wormhole and just start looking up the one name and see where it appears and all that kind of stuff, and you'll find out interesting things. Like I haven't done enough information on the person of Gad, so I'm surprised. So now I'm interested. I want to learn more about Gad and the book of Gad if I can find that. But at any rate, thank you, Jacqueline. I'm about ready to finish up here. So verse 9, right after that, says there was nothing in there. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses put in there at Horeb, where the Lord made a covenant with the people of Israel when they came out of the land of Egypt. So you remember, these are the 10 commandments, right? There's nothing in there but that. Why is that kind of strange?
I thought at one time there was the container that had manna in it.
Yes.
Tabernacle.
Yes. And there's one more thing in there as well. Do you know what else?
I thought Aaron's staff was in there.
Yeah. Good job, Rod.
But I went back, and the only thing I could find about Aaron's staff was that day that it budded, that it was outside in the room where the tabernacle is.
And that's one of the theories of why the manna and the rod isn't there. They may not have been in the ark, but it also says that it would place them in the ark as the command of God. But then it shows that one place where the rod isn't actually in there. So, but they're not in there here at this point for whatever reason. All that you have is the 10 commandments that are in here. And at any rate, then it's called the Ark of the Covenant. Do you know why that ark is called the Ark of the Covenant?
Yeah, I mean, isn't it the covenant that the people made with the Lord, with Moses, and
Yeah, but why would the ark be called the Ark of the Covenant? Jacqueline, you were going to say something?
I was gonna, kind of similar to what Rod said, that just, it was created during the time of the covenant that got made between, Moses and God, and the Israelites and God. And then it also is where God would come to the mercy seat, where he would encounter with interact with them.
Okay, this is the reason why it's called the Ark of the Covenant. It's because it contains the 10 commandments. It's a part of the written covenant. It's a part of the written covenant of God. It's God's handwriting. It's God's covenant. So it's holding God's writing, the covenant, in the ark. So it's the ark that contains the covenant. So that's why it's because the 10 commandments are in there. That's why. All right, and then he builds a temple, really long prayer of dedication, and then he prays for the people as well, and then he has all these sacrifices. And let me see here. Let me see. I'll make sure I don't miss something here. I'm missing something here. Just a second. Okay, verse 10 says, and the priest came out of the holy place. A cloud filled the house of the Lord. The priest could not stand to minister because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. There's that passage I told you about where the glory fills the temple. That's the cloud. And then you have fire coming down. So Solomon prays, but when it's recounted this time of prayer where he kneels and he prays, that then God sends fire and consumes the sacrifices written about in Chronicles, not in Kings, but it is there. And that is there to show that this is God, a verification that this is the place where you do all your sacrifices. This is the place where God said he would choose a place. I'm choosing it. There it is. All right. So then we go into chapter 9, verse 1. As soon as Solomon had finished the buildings of the house of the Lord and the king's house and all that Solomon desired to build, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time as he appeared to him at Gibeon. That's why I think it's a dream again. Does that make sense? But it's only twice. It's only twice. I think, and Jacqueline will probably have something to say about this, is like, I'm continually astounded by the number of different ways God speaks to people. You know, it's different for all the way through the Bible, you know, so we all want to hear from God, and he speaks to people differently, but it's interesting that he seems to do it most of the time the same way to the same person when it's described. So when God speaks to Abraham, I think every time he's physically there, or it just doesn't tell you, you know, it says the Lord came to Abraham, you know. There's some differences. When Jacob meets God, he meets him in a wrestling match, and he also has a vision where he sees the stairs going to heaven and the angels ascending and descending on those stairs. But that's in a dream. And he has other dreams where God speaks to him. And Joseph has like dreams, but they're interpretive dreams. It's not God speaking to him in dreams. They're just dreams that tell him the future. And then he has the meaning of those dreams, right? Mary, angel in person. Joseph, a dream. David, how does the Lord speak to David?
Through prophets, I think, and through his own songs.
Yes, through other prophets. Now, also, he does seem to write prophecies that he sees that came from God too. We don't know how God communicated those things because he wrote them down in songs, but we do know that God's, every time you read where God actually talks to David, it's through another person, you know, a prophet. And so I just think that one of the things that Jacqueline could help me out here is really spending time trying to discern how God speaks to you. And, you know, Jacqueline, did you listen to my message? Did you listen to my message last week?
I did not get to, our cat ended up, we had to take it in to put it down. And so we were gone all that time, and I've gotten to see it on YouTube.
That's fine. One of the things I said in that, it wasn't the part of the message. It was just something I said that I know there are people that hear from God. I tend to, in my silence, I'm trying to hear God, I don't hear anything. But what I do notice, and this is what I've noticed, is that when I spend time alone with God and in silence, it is amazing how much I come out of that with a certain amount of clarity about something. Even though it's not in words, it's not in pictures, it's not in dreams. I just know. Or like the whole message that on Sunday, that whole message, I could not tell you hardly anything I was going to teach on Sunday because I was like, I don't know what to do here. And I just went and I spent like an hour just in silence saying, God help me. And I came out of that and then I sat down on the computer and the whole message came together. And I had been working at it all week and just like, God, I got nothing. And that happens to me a lot, especially in trying to prepare messages. Jacqueline, you're going to say something? Nope.
Yep.
Yep.
I was going to say, I definitely know that, one of the things I encourage people to do is to find out how God speaks to them. When we say hearing God, it doesn't necessarily always mean hearing something with your ears. That it's God created each person individually and he knows what's going to interact with them the most. So like when I quote unquote hear from God, most of the time what happens is I see something take place, either in my mind's eye or actually I will physically see something take place. And then all of a sudden there's this understanding that just drops into my spirit where I recognize, oh, this is God letting me know that something's going on. And then, I have the interpretation of what that is and how to move forward into that. But, like I've had friends who hear from God through smelling things, and God would show them things through smells or, I know there's people obviously that get, crazy things like open visions or, stuff like that. But then, there's just a lot of things that are small things. And it's how does God speak to you, and then learning that, and then just learning to perfect hearing God's voice in that, learning the still small voice concept.
Yeah. I think you're right. That's one of the things I'm learning about just spending time in prayer is I'm like, I don't know how you're trying to speak to me, God, show me. But I do know that somehow I just wake up out of those times of silence. And sometimes it's like I do that, and then later it all comes to me. I don't know. So that I would recommend in your own walk with God to be asking God, how do you speak to me? Show me how you tend to speak to me so that I get the answers that I need from you, because he does want us to hear him. And that I actually really learned from Jacqueline was like, in order to obey him, we have to hear him. We have to, and he's not making us guess, but he does speak to us differently as individuals. So anybody else have any questions or anything you want to add? All right. Hey, Jacqueline, can you pray?
Yeah, I could pray.
Okay.
Lord, thank you for today and thank you for the opportunity to come together and to discuss your word yet again. I just pray that each one of us would learn what it is to hear your voice, and that we would learn how to hear what you're saying to us. Lord, be it through scripture, be it through prayer time, Lord, be it through whatever way it is that you desire to speak to us. Just make that something that comes alive to each of us, that a relationship with you, not just knowing about you, but actually interacting with you becomes a real thing in each of our lives. That we would say, I don't know about God, I know God. Lord, just like so many of the people in the Bible, Lord, help us to know you in a personal, real way. And I just pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And I will see you guys.